House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Dave Martino is back.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm back. I'm here.
The Rolling Stone magazine they've released their 50 greatest mistakes made in rock and roll.
Oh, really?
And just for a primer, number 10 is Billy Squier obliterates his career with one cheesy music video in 1984.
Yep, I remember that.
I still can't believe that's a problem. I don't know. I didn't realize it was such a... I heard a lot of stuff, but I just didn't realize. So yeah, there's something to look forward to, and we're going to talk about Janet Jackson and
interesting.
And Kiss that made a movie.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Phantom of the Opera.
And no one's seen it. Or you?
No one's seen it.
You probably did, right?
I've seen some of it. Yeah.
So is it one of the greatest mistakes?
It's one of the greatest movies of all time. What are you talking about?
Oh, I should have known. Well, so we're going to bring in a writer here. His book, The Poison Machine. Doesn't that say it all? So, Mr. Robert J. Lloyd, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very flattered that you have. How
did you get into writing? This is a fairly new career for you, right?
Well, I dabbled, so I started writing the first book back in 2000, and it's so long ago, I can't really recall why I did, but, one day I decided I would write a thriller, and it took me 13, 14 years before I was ready to kind of send it out. So it was done very part-time around my teaching job. I put it away for months at a time, kept coming back to it. It eventually had a year out, kind of paternity leave year and finished it off. That was 2010. So yeah, I did a history, MA. I used to did a fine art degree, wrote a very long thesis, kind of got into writing back, during those degrees. But yeah, I've recently come out of teaching, but it's always been around my other main job.
Yeah, but it takes quite it's different. I mean, it's easier nowadays to publish than it was 50 years ago, but even through publishers somewhat, because there's so many more of them. But it still takes a lot of initiative, a lot of drive, and a lot of belief and hope and everything. So there's a lot of passion and I think some courage involved into actually putting together a book, putting it out there, and letting people read it. I just think that's there's usually something that pushes someone there, or something that happens that makes someone go that direction.
I think there was a tipping point. It became such a millstone because I'd been chipping away at it for so long. I had to get the thing finished, otherwise, I couldn't have looked anybody in the eye. I talked about it for so long, and they were constantly asking, "How's the book going?" After 10 years, that gets wearing.
Yeah, I guess it would be. So now, the first book, would that be The Bloodless Boy?
Yep, that's right. The Bloodless Boy. So it's a historical thriller. It's got a lovely Lee Child blurb on the front. He enjoyed it. So it's pitched as being a thriller. A few people very kindly have called it a literary thriller. I'm not quite sure what that means. There are some long words in it, I think. But that's the main aim, is that it thrills, it entertains, and that they are murder mysteries essentially, but set in the later half of the 17th century, using two natural philosophers of the Royal Society. So real characters, Robert Hooke and Henry Hunt, or Harry. I've chosen real characters to turn into fictionalized versions of themselves as they investigate murders.
Yeah. Anytime an American hears English people, it's literary. Just the accent. It's got to be literary fiction. So historical fiction, and now that seems to be kind of a trend lately, where people are taking historical characters or an historical event, sometimes both. They mix it together, and then they create a story out of that didn't happen, or sometimes they finish the story that was unknown, or they kind of, they just do something with it, and they add their own characters, and they do all this stuff. How do you put this together? Like when you're doing this, like in your first book there, what was your, let's say, structure in doing this? Like what, from the get-go? So you had the idea first, or you had the characters first, or all this, how does it all come together for you?
I had the idea of writing a thriller. I wanted to write some kind of murder mystery. And in my MA degree, I had researched Robert Hooke, and my thesis was about Robert Hooke and the early science of the Royal Society. So I had a lot of research to fall back on. And one of the many things that he did, he was a polymathic genius, but one of the many things he did was write a book called Micrographia. The starting point, he built, designed, improved microscopes and used them to study nature, and published a very beautiful book. So my starting point was, wouldn't it be nice to have his expertise in microscopy brought to bear on an investigation, on a murder investigation? So a kind of CSI 17th century London. That was my start point. I could have used fictional characters, but that seemed very artificial to kind of write new natural philosophers, as they called themselves, and have fictional fellows of the Royal Society. So I made the decision to revivify them, which is the theme of the first book anyway. So it kind of made sense. It does bring up some interesting moral, ethical issues when you're using real characters, which interests me. You I know write a lot of real crime books, so this must be a consideration for you, and the kind of there's a sensitivity around using real people. But my characters mostly have been dead for 300 years, so perhaps my considerations are slightly lesser than yours.
Well, I think that I was more focused on it years ago, and then I got into some courses and about how, when we write old stories like that, because I was doing some things from 100 years ago, some murders, and we're relying on second and third hand information in a lot of cases, newspaper reports, because nobody's alive. And so everything we have is sort of two-dimensional. It's not like I can really do an in-depth kind of review or of what a character is. If you only get certain sides to the story, and then the reason certain groups and certain newspapers print in a certain way is because of what they believed at the time. But when you're away from that, the emotion's gone, and you read it, you don't. So I understand totally the get-go and do all this stuff. I think the hardest part must be filling in what kind of person that character would be.
Yeah, and there are disadvantages. Luckily, well, I like the difference actually. Luckily, we know ever such a lot about Robert Hooke. We know next to nothing about his apprentice Harry, who later worked his way up through the Royal Society. He was an operator, an observator, keeper of the library, keeper of the repository. So he was, he's in the Royal Society records, various things that he did, but we know very little about his life. So with Robert Hooke, the character is given. You can't redesign his character in order to fit the theme of your book or the plot of your book better. He kind of is what he is. But I have a lot more freedom with Harry, and take, liberties, of inventing, characteristics for him that we absolutely don't know. We haven't got any kind of physical description. We haven't got people's opinions on him apart from when he was recommended to the Royal Society. That gives me a lot of space to play in.
Well, I was going to ask how much, and you basically went into that literary license do you need to take with the characters when dramatizing the story, but I'm also wondering, with the plot points, can you take a lot of literary license when doing that, or do you have to kind of follow history as it happened?
Part of the reason the first book took so long is that I tried to stick too closely to the historical timeline. It was all about a very famous unsolved murder, which I won't say the character's name because it's the midpoint of the book. But there's a 17th century murder that happened, and it was used as fuel to promulgate the popish plot, which was a major kind of bout of hysteria that London went through in the late 1670s, early 1680s. So yes, I had this major event, and I've produced my fictional solution of this particular man's murder. I then extended it backwards to make a fictional investigation that he was involved in, that Harry and Hooke go by. That originally I still have a few. I looked closely at Hooke's diary, which is details all sorts of interesting, fascinating events, and had various events that I knew wanted to be in the book. You end up compressing events in time purely for kind of reasons of logic and narrative simplicity. But historians do that as well, don't they? And I feel more relaxed about doing. I used to be a bit squeamish about doing these kinds of things, making stuff up for characters. But once you start creating dialogue, you kind of moved away from history. But like I say, historians cherry pick. They find nuggets in their research that goes into their final published book. They'll edit people out of the historical record. History is horribly messy, and it has far too many characters. In a thriller, you kind of need to keep things moving, so you do have to be a little bit brutal sometimes, and sometimes you could even shock yourself what you do to these characters.
Well, yeah, and when I compare it to some of the modern day crimes I've written about, and it's probably the same. You go to different groups or of people that they worked with, they lived with, or they went to school with, or they partied with, and they all describe sometimes a totally different person. They all give you a different description of who this person is and what they're like and what they would and wouldn't do. So after a while, I started realizing that it's not totally reliable either, what you're going to hear. So you just kind of have fun with it. Why not? Do you try to change who they are in the mental, like in the landscape of society? When you take these two main characters, are you trying to change their position of what people in general think of them?
It's a kind of fuzzy line. All these decisions that you make. No, it wouldn't make sense to change Robert Hooke's character from my point of view. I like to stick with the physical facts about him. I like to, there are a lot of people's opinions on Hooke, his contemporaries. He was so busy and involved with so many people. He was the kind of engine of the Royal Society at this time. He was a lifelong friend of Christopher Wren. John Aubrey is another character who wrote about Hooke in some detail. It doesn't make sense to me to kind of make changes. I'm not going to turn Robert Hooke into Jack Reacher for the purposes of my novel.
I was thinking more like RuPaul.
Well, maybe I'm in the middle of book 3. Maybe that can make a scene, or maybe Harry.
Certainly make the news.
There's a lot of disguises in book 3. I've kind of looked at the 39 steps, and they've been inspired by Richard Hannay, donning disguise after disguise. Maybe RuPaul could find it. A 17th century version.
Yeah.
Mollies, they were called back then.
In the Bloodless Boy, I see now you've got the city of London, 1678. There's the Great Fire, and the fall of Oliver Cromwell, and the restoration of the true king, or whatever. So you got this kind of skyline, I'll say, this outline here. Why choose something like that to put the characters in? Why?
Because you think of the times they lived through. As you say, the civil wars, the restoration, the plague, the fire in 1666. Robert Hooke was central to the rebuilding of London, as well as being an architect. He was the main city surveyor, and apparently physically measured out as many as a quarter of the buildings that had been destroyed. So he was absolutely central. He wrote certificates of compensation. He was a very, very busy man. So as well as his science, he was instrumental in the rebuilding of London. Having chosen Hooke as my main character, he brings all of this with him. So though I can't imagine editing any of that out. As we move into the late 1670s, the Popish plot gripped London. Then the exclusion crisis, where James II announced that he was a Catholic, and this worried everybody as far as who was going to take over after Charles II. So all of this for me is very rich ground, and I enjoy mucking around in it. Yeah, I find that fascinating. It's so interesting, all the ins and outs in that's going on during a time. If you go center around what's happening and all the players and stuff like that. I think that's fascinating. But does that in itself, like when you take this, like the Catholic plots, like the stuff that's kind of going on, when you take that, are you kind of setting up is this to get some sort of a meaning or subtext throughout the book? Are you trying to say something? People apply their own subtext. My main thing, I think, is that Hooke and Harry represent the new science, but also I mean, interestingly, in the first book, well, one of the main protagonists is John Locke, but they themselves represent a kind of liberal, empirical, perhaps a kind of rational, experimentally based outlook. They want to get to the truth, and you use the tools of their trade to do so, while all around them is hysteria and mayhem. That, for some reason, seems to strike a bit of a chord nowadays. It's come out at an interesting time. The way that science is viewed, the kind of hysteria that surrounded the Popish plot, where everyone was convinced that the Catholics were about to take over, and every kind of misfortune or you know, in the book there's a murder is ascribed to Catholic malfeasance. So when I actually wrote it, the main thing I had in mind was racism, and there was a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment going on in the British press and the British government. You know, Harry in particular represents my kind of woolly liberalism, but he as far as the murders and the mystery, you know, he is going to pick his way through all of the kind of madness around him.
I don't know about you, but the few historical things I've touched off on when I've been writing, I found that it's the same things people fighting about then are the same things they're fighting about today. You know, the players have changed and our dynamics, the way we fight, you know, we've got social media and computers, electronics and all that, rather than the old, just a newspaper or society thing.
They had, yeah, I mean, in London, they had the coffee houses and the newsletters, and I think, you know, it was gossip.
Yeah.
And I think gossip would go around the city like wildfire. You know, person to person. It is. I mean, we're very lucky, aren't we, that we have Twitter, so you can see all of the kind of crazies out there. But by crazies, I mean people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
You can see the whole range of positions that people take, and it's no different in the 17th century. So an issue like exclusion, you would have a whole spectrum of views on that, you know, people who were sympathetic, who mistrusted the propaganda, people who went with it, and this is reflected, you know, our distrust of government, is you know, all there in the 1670s. Well, the British, after all, had fought a war about it, you know, 25 years before my books are set. And welcomed back a king, but limited his powers, and then he proceeded through guile and cleverness to kind of claw those powers back. All these different characters come to the fore, don't they? And the ones with the loudest voices get their sort of fans together and get their support bases together, and money comes in. Think tanks aren't anything new. So the kind of all the different factions and people pulling the strings. It's nothing's changed, has it? As you say.
No, some of the headlines from 100 years ago were the same things I see today. Just, you know, maybe a different circumstance, but it's the same premise of some sort of racist sort of thing or some sort of fight over it. And I think, well, they're still doing it today. Thank God it's changed.
Yeah. The myth of progress.
Yeah. Now, The Poison Machine. Is this a sequel?
It's a direct sequel. Yeah. So same characters. This is it's about another murder. This is the murder of the Queen's dwarf. An extraordinary, again, a real character, a real person who existed, but so kind of bonkers that I had to write about it. So Captain Jeffrey Hudson was Queen Henrietta Maria's dwarf. He was only 18 inches tall. And as a 7-year-old, he was presented to her in a pie. They made a suit of armour for him. She also had a giant called William Evans, who was 7'7". Apparently he used to put Jeffrey Hudson inside a loaf of bread and hide him in his pocket and produce him like a sandwich. So he was weirdly an excellent horseman, which I can't quite get my head around, and a superb shot. And he was taken off to the Dutch court to be shown off as a rarity of nature. He was then taken to the French court during the Civil Wars, when the Queen was trying to drum up some money for her husband's army. And Jeffrey Hudson ended up getting himself involved in a duel. Presumably someone took the mickey out of him. He promptly shot the man dead. He then escaped from France because dueling was prohibited. This is the real Hudson I'm talking about. Ended up in captivity with the Barbary pirates for 25 years and was eventually ransomed and released and returned to England. In fact, his cottage still exists. You can visit it in a place called Oakham on the east coast in England. So I had this sort of mad character that I desperately wanted to write about. But the killer fact is that when he had returned from his 25 years of captivity, he was twice the height. He was now 3 feet tall, which pleased him no end, apparently. But to me, it just suggested that this is a different man. This is an imposter, and that's where the whole thing started. So they discover age-old bones that have been lying in the bottom of the boat since the Civil Wars. They realise it's Jeffrey Hudson. No one knew or thought he was dead because an imposter's been living in his place. The imposter has disappeared, and Harry is given the job of finding the imposter, which leads him then into more conspiracies and intrigues, and mayhem ensues.
Yeah, you got the Illuminati's involved. It has to be.
Not this time, but Rude Pool is definitely in the background, waiting to pounce.
Oh, good. Going So it's funny. So when you've got this going, are you thinking of doing a big pile of books with these characters, that kind of a series?
I've just been presented with the contract by Melville House, my publisher, for books 3 and 4. Book 3 is well underway. I've got a deadline as well, which is a bit alarming. So certainly 4 books. I've got a kind of sketch for book 4. Like I was saying earlier, history carries on, doesn't it? So if I've got to 1681, then 1682, 1683 is there ready to be mined. As long as I still have an interest in the characters. My character Harry is a young man, so he's coming out from Hooke's shadow, so he's changing. So he's a kind of interesting character to follow as he changes and learns through suffering most of the time. He does go through a fair old bit. So his development is interesting through the books. And we've got all sorts of things coming up. Monmouth tried to take over the throne after his father's death, but he was illegitimate. James II took over. William of Orange, the Protestant prince, was brought in his place. There's plenty of history ahead of us. So whether I carry on or whether I switch maybe I'll start writing in a different time frame. I don't know, but I'm certainly enjoying being with my characters at the moment.
Well, your first book, The Bloodless Boy, was originally self-published. How did you end up getting it traditionally published? How did that work?
Well, this is I sent it to literary agents, and 4 agents wanted it. So I thought, wow, this is incredible. If you read the statistics, it really is incredible. How many books agents get. So four were interested. I went to meet with 2, signed up with 1. They sent it out after a re-edit to various publishers, and 4 publishers were interested. And I thought this is incredible. They asked for rewrites. It was very long. They wanted sort of things trimming mainly. I had to retense it. Originally it was in the present tense. I put it into the past tense. So I made these changes, but no contract ensued. So I self-published. So feeling crushed by the whole process. But I had a book. I self-published it, did a Kindle version, and then I was much quicker with book 2 because I planned it. So again, around my teaching role, I wrote the second book, and self-published that. That went through my agents to various publishers as well. And, it was all close, but mostly gone. So the self-published versions rattled along and got nice reviews and sold, reasonably. But they kind of potted along. And then one day I got a phone call from my daughter who said, "You've just been on Radio 4. And the author, Christopher Fowler, who writes the Bryant and May mysteries, had been on Radio 4 on a program all about unputdownable stories. And he said my books were, unputdownable. So this is really the thing that changed everything. And I owe Christopher Fowler, I call him Chris nowadays, ever such a lot. And he wrote about the books on his blog, which is very popular. And then that, through one of his fans who's a bookseller, in, San Francisco, he suggested it to Dennis Johnson at Melville House in New York. So the first I knew of that was getting an email, which I thought was a scam email. I'm a painter. I do landscapes and portraits as well. And I've got a website. I get all sorts of odd scam emails from people, trying to, extract either paintings or money out. I'm not quite sure how they think they'll succeed in that, but, it looked like a scam, and I kind of put it away. I opened it up again and go, "Who's this Dennis Johnson?" And looked the guy up, and when he said he wanted to publish my books, I realized that actually he had a rather large publishing company in New York and seemed to mean business. So it was like winning the lottery, and I feel like a very lucky man indeed. So they again, with some re-editing, they've taken the stories. We've retitled the second one. It's become The Poison Machine. They have produced these beautiful hardbacks with wonderful end papers and illustrations and deckled edges, and it's a very kind of high-end product that they've gone for. So I feel very lucky. There's an audio version which has affected the way I write, because I now imagine my characters speaking with James Gillies' voice, who does the audio book. So big changes, and I feel very blessed.
One thing I'm curious about, because I've done primarily nonfiction work, and you go out, do the research, put it together, do the story. With a lot of fiction writers, horror writers, and historical fiction writers I talk to, you ask them about their characters, and their characters are like people to them. They're like friends or family, and they hear voices, and they see them, and they interact with them, and it's like watching them on a movie screen or something. You hear all this stuff. And for me, I don't experience that with the real people that I've been dealing with. I'm not getting that. But you kind of having the best of both here, in the sense that you're doing some truth and research and the basic events and even characters, but you're also doing, you're creating a character like a fictional writer would. So when you have that kind of situation, what's your sense of your characters?
Like I say, the character of Harry is a bit of a self-portrait. And me as a younger man, as he sort of fumbles his way through to some kind of solution. The relationship between Harry and Hooke through the process of writing became a portrait of my relationship with my father. So that's become kind of very special to me, and the kind of it's a father-son relationship anyway, and it's become a portrait of my relationship with Dad. The one character that really did kind of take over, and I had to kind of edit him brutally in the re-edits. It was as if he was just talking over my shoulder, and I was writing down what he was saying. There's an old soldier in the Bloodless Boy who fought for Parliament, and a leveller, and he becomes Harry's kind of almost like a second mentor, and certainly his friend. And he regales Harry with all sorts of tales about the civil wars and so on. He is the one voice that really, I really did just kind of let him ramble on, and he wrote himself. Other people, like the King, for example, you kind of feel your way to a portrait of him that you're happy with. So I emphasised the kind of brave, soldierly side of him, but also the kind of cunning and guile. What I didn't want him to be was to be just the merry monarch, which is the cliche of Charles II. So as far as characters living in your head, I think with me it's probably more plot points, reverses and solutions and twists. They're the things that I kind of worry at more, I think. But I've probably said enough on that, haven't I?
Well, except for, when you're hearing someone's voice. Does that happen when you drive?
Only in my driving test. I'm very deaf, and when I'm deaf on the left side, which obviously in the UK, he was sitting on my left in the test, and so I asked him to speak up, explain that I'm deaf in my left ear. So my driving test, I had this guy screaming instructions at me all the way round, which was great. It was Mr. Lloyd. That voice will always stay. I hope I don't hear too many imaginary voices, at least.
Have your characters ever gone off the rails and kind of taken over the plot? Do they refuse to do things, or do you have a lot of control over what's going on during the first draft?
I do now. The first one took ages because I was inexperienced, and I tried to sort of write and see where the writing took me. The second one I planned, but a long plan. So if you do, each book is just over 100,000 words, so a 10,000 word plan. When characters take over, or they, let them do it in the plan is my current point. I can follow where they want to go, and it's much easier to do that or rewrite a 10,000 word outline than a 100,000 word book. So most of the surprises that characters throw up will come in the what's a fairly extensive planning process, and any kind of insurrections that I feel will really cut across what I'm trying to do with the plot, then I'll stamp them down.
Yeah. Who's the boss?
That's right.
Absolutely. You have to assert yourself to yourself sometimes, don't you?
That's right. Slap yourself around. So,
it's something I enjoy too much, actually, the slapping myself around.
Yeah, that's for a different series of books.
It distracts from the writing. Yeah.
Well, okay. Now, how do you like interacting with readers and fans, or do you like getting into that? Do you belong to a lot of social media? Do you have a website? All of those platforms. And if you do, what are they? So maybe people can find you.
I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I can't get my head around Instagram, but I have tried. Twitter's my main thing as far as readers, and we have a wonderful thing in the UK which doesn't seem to happen so much in the States, but we have book bloggers. So the UK arm of Melville House have kind of encouraged people to blog about them. I run competitions for free copies of the books for my book bloggers, and what a wonderful bunch of people, and they work so hard for free to push books. So I enjoy Twitter. We mentioned it earlier. I haven't got into too many scrapes on Twitter. But yes, I really enjoy reading reviews, good and bad. The fact that it's gone through the stories have gone through another person's consciousness and kind of met their particularities and their foibles and their preoccupations, and it gets filtered through, and you get a review that sometimes just knock you sideways because they're so odd. And you think, my God, I should have thought of that. Why haven't I considered that? I've been writing the thing for 15 years. You get all sorts of interesting things thrown up. A couple of people I've disagree with. Good reads. Got a bit aggressive at one point with a particular person, which I felt a bit burned by that. But generally, I do need a website. I should set up a website for the books. I have one for the paintings.
Yeah.
But yeah, socially, I've made friendships over Twitter with people I've never actually met, and internationally, which is fantastic. So I do enjoy Twitter, but I've got a kind of bookie corner of it, and don't get too involved in the more controversial aspects of Twitter.
Oh, they're starting anti-mask rallies and causing trouble, and
I used to have a grumble on Twitter about our government, but I might get one like and a wave, but it's but books are much safer things to stay with. I'll try and put my political views forward in the books, I think.
Yeah. And that's kind of and not only that, it's better to do that live anyway, right? If you're going to have a talk about more serious things, it's better to do it live rather than over the internet. But that's
the idea of talking live on radio, for example, that would worry me sick. I think I'd say all sorts of stupid things. I need time to reflect, and Do you remember letters? Weren't they good? Writing on posh paper. That's the way all communication should be done, I think.
Well, yeah, me too. You know, I've said all sorts of stupid things, and I'm still here.
Well done.
Well,
a long way that continue.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you, it gives me enough, you know, starting paper. I got hundreds of papers. No, it's all digital nowadays. So
maybe you could call your program Not Been Cancelled Yet.
Yeah. No. Yeah, not in jail yet. Do you sort of know, like in your head ahead of time, do you know kind of where you're going to go with this character? Like what kind of events? Do you kind of have that kind of all mapped out in your mind of what they're going to do, or does it just happen when you need to do it?
I know what happened in their lives, but like I said earlier, Harry, the details are very sparse. I know exactly what's going to happen in book 3 because I'm towards finishing the first draft and having done a long plan, as I said. Book 4 is sketched out. That might change. I want to do something formally slightly different with that and have a split time frame. But book 5 has yet to suggest itself. If I stay with the same series, maybe I'll try and write something. Maybe I'll need refreshing. Then with a different. Maybe I could do a modern one with all the mobile phones and networks and things like that. AI. I do like my little corner of the 17th century, so I'll probably stick there.
I know, I have an idea. Why don't you do one about the pandemic back then? That's something fresh.
Haven't we had enough?
Yeah.
My daughter is or was, I should say, she's changed now. She was an ICU nurse at Guy's and St Thomas's, which is one of the big hospitals in London. Throughout the pandemic, certainly at its height. So I think I may have had enough of the pandemic for her sake. She went through it. She went through it. To do a 12+ hour shift in full protective equipment, and then come out of your shift, walk out of the hospital, and be confronted with COVID deniers who were claiming that nothing was actually happening inside that hospital. I found that bewildering and grim.
Yeah. Certainly gives you a perspective on how people will act in reality, especially because a lot of times we watch things or read and we'll say about certain events or characters, so that's crazy. That would never happen. Nobody would ever do that. And then we live through it.
Yeah.
And they're crazy.
I know it is fascinating what happens in other people's heads, isn't it? It constantly fascinates me. And I try to understand and find explanations, but it's so foreign to my way of thinking that it kind of repels me at the same time as fascinates me.
I just know if it happens again, I'm going to go buy up all the toilet paper. Sell it for high price. I don't know, man. It's crazy. Well, it's been enjoyable. I've had a good time.
I get a whole enjoyable from you, do I, Alan? Thank you.
Yeah, that's big for me. Good. So now the book, you need to go out and buy it. Our buddy over there in the UK needs, inflation. Things are going up. It's got to pay for bread. So The Poison Machine. And the author's been our guest, Robert J. Lloyd. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much indeed. I really, really enjoyed the conversation, Alan, and Dave. You were slightly in the background there, but yeah, great to meet you both and chat to you both.
Thanks, Robert.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.